and welcome back to Why This Film, the podcast where we reach back into your childhood, pluck out a movie, have a rewatch, and a little bit of a chat about it. I'm Emily Slade, and welcome back. You watched it so many times before, and now you're gonna watch it again. But it's been so many years since you last saw it, and now you show it to your friends, and they're like, What?
What am I watching?
Why this film? And I'm joined today by Corey from Podcasting After Dark. Hello, Corey.
Hey, how's it going, Emily? Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on. And your chosen movie is 1982's Tron. The IMDb breakdown. A computer hacker is abducted into the digital world and forced to participate in gladiatorial games where his only chance of escape is with the help of a heroic security program. What is your relationship with this movie?
Oh, well, I was born in 1978, so I am pretty old, and I pretty much grew up my entire life with this film. It's in my top 5. You know, I gave you a list when you asked, like, what movies should we do? I gave you a list of my top 5, and this is up there with, and I'll just throw it out there, you know, my list starting at number 1 is Aliens, the James Cameron film, and number 2, I say, is Return of the Jedi, even though my life is just all Star Wars all the time, and then 3, 4, and 5 are Ghostbusters, Road Warrior, and Tron, and that pretty much just makes up my entire essence as a kid growing up in the 80s right there. But I will say this. My dad had no disregard for the MPA ratings, so I saw, like, Aliens in the theater when I was, like, 7 years old or 8 years old. Yeah, it terrified me. Absolutely terrified me. I saw Return of the Jedi in the theater. I saw Ghostbusters in the theater. I never saw Road Warrior in the theater, and I never saw the original Tron in the theater up until about 5 years ago. And I can talk about that experience later. It involves my wife, and it's a fun experience. But I grew up renting it all the time from the video store. You know, I had the little toys. And, you know, back in the 80s, you didn't have, you know, the internet. You didn't have, like, any of these images, high-res images you could look at online. So if I wanted to have a recall of the movie, if I wanted to draw the movie, I'd have to rent it, you know. I'd have to experience it again. And it was just, one of those movies that I really just loved as a kid. It just brought the imagination out of me. It was over my head, like way over my head, like what was happening, you know. Like I feel like I understand the movie much more as an adult than I did as a kid, and I love it even with all of its, you know, faults and everything. It is not a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination. It has massive amounts of faults to it, especially when it comes to, like, storytelling conventions and stuff like that, but just the heart and the love is there, I think. So, and what's your experience with it?
Yeah, well, the first time I heard of Tron was when Tron Legacy came out in 2010. I'd never even heard of it before that, and the first thing surrounding Tron Legacy was that it was a sequel to Tron, the 1980s movie. I had no desire to see either movie whatsoever. I didn't really know anything about it until I sat down to watch it an hour and a half ago, and I had no idea what it was about. I had no idea who was in it. Even when I was watching it, I was like, I know that man's voice is Jeff Bridges, but that man does not look like Jeff Bridges.
He's so young in the movie.
Oh, he's so hot. And I'm really glad that you said that the movie has flaws, because I was really worried that I was going to come on here and, like, hurt your feelings, because I can see why it wasn't an initial cinematic success, but I can also see how it then became a cult success. Like, I can see both reasons behind that. I found it interesting to get through. It was a bit slow. The first sort of half an hour, bang on 30 minutes in, he gets sucked into the machine, and that's perfect pacing. And then from there, I was like, sort of, oh gosh, okay, you're right in terms of the storytelling aspects about it. I wasn't quite sure what was going on half the time, but the visual effects reminded me of Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, the animated version. with the live action filming, with the hand-drawn animation on top. It was really interesting visually. I agree that it was imaginative. The storytelling was very slow, and the first half an hour is brilliantly paced. Like, you get straight into it, bang on 30 minutes in, he gets sucked into the computer, and you're like, yes, let's do this, Jeff Bridges. But then I'm a bit like, what? Why is David Warner playing all of the characters? Like, what? And then at the end, he sort of comes out again, and he's the boss of the company now. And I was like, and then the credits rolled. Like, Tron. So I don't think I would have, if I had watched it as a kid, I don't think it would have interested me back then either. I could, as an adult, I could very much watch it from I really respect what they were doing in terms of visual effects. It's very clearly like very early Pixar kind of vibes.
I gotta say, it's a perfect movie to put on in the background at a party or something, and just the visuals of it, you know, and I get everything that you're saying about it. I totally see it. I totally get it. You know, I almost feel like I found a more of an appreciation, love for it later in my life. As much as a kid, it influenced me, but not as much as like Star Wars did, and probably not as much as Aliens did. And you know, it's one of those movies that I've gotten into more so later on. But it has massive faults in it, especially when it comes to the pacing, like you said. The pacing's a bit wonky, and then when you get into the meat of the story in the middle of it, there's all kinds of little weird things that happen that you're like, why did that happen? Like when Jeff Bridges, Flynn's character, knocks out one of the bad guys, and then Jeff Bridges becomes red, and you're like, why did that happen? And then like he also attacks Tron for a split second before Tron sort of knocks him off the edge, you know, and saves him, you know. But like why did he even attack Tron to begin with? It was like these weird little plot points that they had to insert just to kind of make the story move forward. And
but they didn't make sense or connect to anything. There was no real threat. I didn't feel like we were, I don't know, like desperate to get out of there or anything. Why does he kiss the other guy's girlfriend?
I literally thought that. well, that was originally his girlfriend back in the day, right? And then Tron, Bruce Boxleitner, his character, but at the same time, it's like, well, that's a little scuzzy. You're kissing another dude's girl, like.
and then she's like, "Oh, we thought you were dead," and it's like, at least wait 10 minutes, before you move on. My God, like, I thought we were in love.
And I listened to your Dark Crystal episode, and I really enjoyed that. And one thing that both of you and your guest were talking about was just like kind of like the world building of that movie. And I think Tron is a perfect example of a writer/director who is totally into the world building of everything and totally understands what everything is sort of happening and doing in that world, but he's not as adept at like crafting a story, like crafting some kind of a cohesive narrative. But it's one of those movies where the one side so outweighs the other. Like his ability to create a world is like on a 10, where his ability to craft a story is on like a 4. You know, like it's very, very offset. And you know, but I do love the world that he's crafting. I don't necessarily always love the story of Tron. I absolutely love the world, and it would be one of those things where if I was playing with the toys, I wouldn't be retelling the movie. I would be like doing my own thing.
That's and again,
cool, and like it's I kind of want to stick on this whole like you know, plot versus visuals thing, because there's so many holes and so many things that are lacking. But then you get to something like the light cycle chase, the light cycle thing in the middle, where you know the whole big scene. To this day, that still looks amazing, and as I was mentioning earlier, I'd never seen the movie until seeing it in the theater about 5 years ago. My wife, my then girlfriend, now wife, we saw it in this beautiful theater in downtown Los Angeles, and one of those like 2-story theaters where you can be on the balcony and everything. And
wow.
Not gonna lie, kind of pretty baked, like we smoked before we saw it. But that was my first time seeing it on the big screen. And I got to tell you, that light cycle scene, especially when he says, take him into the maze, and it goes into that first person shot of in the maze. This movie's 40 plus years old, and it still looks absolutely amazing, especially for this scene right here.
It was like, the Phantom Menace's pod race of this movie. Like out of this like sludge, it demanded my attention, and I was like, oh wow, this is really cool and fun, and I'm enjoying watching this. And then the plot came back, and I was like, never mind.
Yeah, and like all these loose things of like, Flynn being a user, and like he brings Yuri, the girl, Tron's girlfriend, back to life, but then he can't bring Ram back to life. And there's all
right.
Yeah, it's you don't know like right, where does his powers lie? There's no you get no like idea of like how to latch on to his powers, his godlike powers. But then Lisberger, the director, does a bad job of that, of like sort of crafting his powers, but he does a good job of doing this whole religious iconography thing going on, right? And like the story, like the ideas that he's trying to convey to people are there. It's just what he placed it in just sometimes does not make sense, And I like the religious aspect of it, especially when Flynn actually tells Tron, he's like, I'm a user, and Tron's like, oh, well then this is all part of your plan, and Flynn's like, well, no, it's not. I just sort of bumped into here, and he's like, well, doesn't all, he's like, that sounds like a program, like we all kind of like move around aimlessly, and he's like, look, I hate to break it to you, but that's how users are too, and and it's like, what if God told you that, right?
Yeah.
It's
the
just
humanity was like an accident. Or whatever. You'd be like, what?
It's just kind of heady, and Lisberger has ideas that he really wanted to convey, but I really think that this was an example of, sometimes like George Lucas with the prequels, it's an example of somebody who has had carte blanche to do the entire story themselves and just really needed a partner, like really needed someone to tell them no, someone to shape the script, because he had great partners with the visual designs. He had Sid Mead. If you know, Sid Mead just passed away like a couple weeks ago, and he did the designs for like Blade Runner, for Aliens, every sci-fi 80s movie that has the most amazing sci-fi stuff you've ever seen was pretty much Sid Mead. And then Lisberger also had Mobius, a very famous UK artist. And he was known for like Heavy Metal magazine. He's known for doing a lot of designs for Star Wars. He did a lot of the storyboards for Star Wars. But look up Mobius. He is a huge European comic book artist. I believe he's from France. Please don't quote me on that, but I think that's where he's from. But so Lisberger had these giant, like megalithic names helping him visually, but nobody helping him story-wise. And I think that is plain as the nose on my face is that's where the faults are in this movie.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And it's such a shame, as you say. Do you know if Tron Legacy in 2010 amended that in any way? Like, did it bring a better story to this world that was so well built? I
mean, I liked Tron Legacy. I know that a lot of people had problems with it. That story is a bit straightforward, and I think it's a better told story. But I think people were like, it was a bit too like linear, there wasn't much to it. But again, Tron Legacy, I saw that movie in the theater, I think 4 times. And the soundtrack, I have the soundtrack for that. I loved it, and I loved it as a continuation of Tron and where it went, and dealing with Flynn older and disconnected from his father. And then honestly, truthfully, you said you saw Tron Legacy, right? Or
no, I haven't.
Okay, so one thing I loved about Tron Legacy was actually the villain. In this movie, Flynn, the original Tron, Flynn has this program called Clue that he basically tries to hack for him at the beginning of the movie, right? You find out later, like after he becomes head of Incom, you find out later that he creates another character of Clue and certified likeness upload, something like that. It's supposed to look like Flynn, right? And basically be Flynn in the grid, when he's not there running things. But in Tron Legacy, essentially, the character of Clue takes over the grid and becomes the bad guy, but it's in the way that good villains are written. Like a good villain doesn't know that they're bad. And, Clue's like, when Clue finally comes face to face with his maker, he's like, I did what you wanted me to do. I made this place perfect. Like, this is what you made me for. Like, why aren't you happy? And that type of thing. And I loved that emotion to it, but I think it was a bit lost underneath a lot of baggage maybe in that movie. But I think Tron Legacy is absolutely fantastic. I think it holds up well. I think it's got an easier point of access because the graphics are better and the story's a little bit better. But I highly recommend Legacy. It's a fun ride. It's really fun. That's
really good to hear, because usually when things come like very late sequels or remakes come into the theaters 20 years after the original, it's like, I'm gonna assume that's gonna be a piece of trash. So that's really nice to hear that they built on what they previously had and it was still enjoyable. The original Tron 1982 was up for Best Costume, weirdly, at the Academy Awards at the time, and Best Visual Effects BAFTA. The Academy Awards did not want to give Best Visual Effects nomination to Tron because they thought using computers was cheating.
Right? Isn't that hilarious? How it's like we've done a complete 180.
Literally. And a lot of Disney animators didn't want to work on it because they were scared that computers would kill 2D animation. They were not wrong.
Yeah, rightfully so.
20 years later, they shut the studio down until John Lasseter resurrected it again, thank God. But yeah, it's interesting. And I imagine if you showed Tron 1982 to children today, they would, it is clunky. It is very early animation and CGI. But you're right in that it's still got a charm about it, and it's still really imaginative and interesting to watch. So this was a Disney movie, so it was more age appropriate than what you were watching alongside it in terms of Aliens and even Star Wars, I'd argue.
Yeah, and that's honestly a thing that I run into with a lot of people. They're like, oh man, E.T., don't you love E.T.? And I'm like, let me again remind you, I saw, I was born in 1978, and everyone can do the math, but I saw Predator in the theater with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I saw RoboCop. I saw a dude melt in front of my eyes in RoboCop, like by the age of 10, right? I saw Aliens, and I turned out just fine. But but like, I don't have much affinity for movies like E.T. and Goonies and stuff like that. Yeah, I saw it, but I've only seen like E.T. like 3 or 4 times, right? I've seen Aliens like 300 times,
Yeah.
So yeah, this one actually, oddly enough, is the most age appropriate movie that I saw at that time. But back to what you're saying about how kids, watching it today, it might be too clunky, but visually it's amazing. Nothing looks like it. Even Tron Legacy doesn't look like this movie. And a lot of that has to do with the hand animation, because this movie sort of technically is animated. I don't know if you looked into how they did the process, but basically they sort of filmed them in black and white, and they had these suits were white with black reflectors on them, and then they had to go in and hand paint the light coming through for just every frame and panel. And it's almost like you were saying, the animation term rotoscoping, where you draw on top of basically a live action footage, you draw on top of it. I personally love Ralph Bakshi's work. I'm a huge Ralph Bakshi fan. I grew up, I'm an artist. I grew up, art classes, reading comic books. I'm a huge nerd, huge artist nerd, and I love Ralph Bakshi's stuff. And it's very akin to that. It was very much a spin on rotoscoping, and they had to do every single panel or every single frame that way, and it's arduous. But the handness, the hand paintedness, is what makes it so unique. You just couldn't create. You can't create like an algorithm to make it as like those random points of light that people are just doing by brushstrokes and stuff. You can't make an algorithm even have that. Like it just would never. You can't make it look that way ever again. And which is nice that Tron Legacy just said we're not going to try to ape it. We're just going to take it to the next level. But it makes this movie like. It makes it retain its specialness, Nothing ever since has ever looked like Tron, ever, for better or worse.
Yeah. It really is really interesting to watch. Like, you start off in the sort of digital world, as it were, and so you're immediately confronted with these figures that look odd and bizarre with their suits on in this sort of digital three-dimensional world, and then you come back and it literally says on the screen like, meanwhile in the real world, and I just couldn't wait to get back into that 3D world with those weird suits and everyone taking it so seriously, like because it so easily could have been so farcical with like the way they look, like most sci-fis, especially pre-2000s sci-fis, have that sort of almost cheesiness about them. But the only time I was really taken aback was when the scientist dude in the real world was playing his counterpart in the Tron world, and he had like a massive penis on his head for a hat. And I was like, who designed that? What is this?
Actually, if you go look at any of Mobius's artwork, he is the king of hat penises. That is 130% Mobius right there. Trust me. And go look at some early designs for like Empire Strikes Back and whatnot. Stormtroopers have hat penises. It's really weird, but Mobius loves that hat. I don't know what the deal is. That's 100% Mobius. Yeah. And did you notice that the old programmer, the oldest guy in the movie, that was the grandpa from Lost Boys too.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. I love that. I loved how there's so much multi-rolling in this sort of Wizard of Oz vibes, where they'll play the user in the real world and then they'll play their digital counterpart with like a code name, as it were. So like, is his name Alan in the real world?
Yeah.
Is then Tron. And when Jeff Bridges is like, "Hey, Alan," and he's like, "I'm Tron. How do you know who Alan is?" So they're aware that the real people exist, whereas the real people aren't aware that the computer people exist. It's really interesting. I got I got a bit of Logan's Run. I got a bit of like The Matrix. I got a bit of like the Lego Movie at one point. Like just all of these different things into this one movie where they were clearly trying to do so much and they had all these wonderful ideas. You're right, they didn't focus it enough. They just didn't have that second person come in to reread the draft and like just streamline it a bit more. So it's a bit all over the place. But it had so much potential.
Yeah, I to this day, I mean, I love everything about it, even its faults. But, would I rather live in an alternate reality where we had maybe a tighter version of that movie that was maybe a little bit better, a little bit well received? Yeah, maybe. I don't know, but probably because, I'm watching the movie and everything last night, and there's some parts where I'm like, all right, I'm going to look at my cell phone for a second or two, or when I went on a posting tirade on Instagram and everything, just posting pictures from Tron. But I mean, that's during some of the little bit of slower parts, and they exist. They're definitely there, and it's an issue that I think George Lucas also had with the prequels. Although after sort of rewatching them in preparation for Rise of Skywalker, I do enjoy the prequels mostly, and honestly, I actually kind of enjoyed them because of their singular vision. One person's sort of driving force, and I like how different they are than the original trilogy, like story wise. And this is not a Star Wars podcast, but I'm also, I guess I'm also a fan of the auteur way of doing things. Like I love John Carpenter. I just really enjoy auteurs, and I like singular vision. So I think the fact that knowing that Tron is like a singular vision of Lisberger's, that even with its faults, I'm like, I love it because it's just one person's vision and it's not story created, a movie created by committee, type of thing.
Yeah, so true. especially because it's a Disney movie as well. All of the creative control being given to this one artist, as it were, is so refreshing compared to the sort of capitalist collaborations that come out these days from that studio.
Yeah, I'm looking right at you, Star Wars Story Group. And I don't hate the sequel trilogy at all, but I do think that Star Wars, some movies that deal with like major mythology, you just need one person. And Tron, OG Tron, I just call the 1982 version OG Tron. And, I mean, it's a mythology movie. It's much more. It's definitely a hero's journey, but he's creating a whole new mythology that was just right at the brink of something. Now we all live with our computers. You and I are talking, so in theory, right? Like there's a version of me, basically, I don't know, flying across the air, trying to go meet a version of you to deliver this data packet or something, right? Like that's what the idea is behind it. But now there's technology everywhere. It's almost hard to even imagine, where the little Tron people are in it. But back then, like especially with simpler video game graphics, you could almost say, oh, I get it. Like that little guy that's running on the screen he's really exists, in this world, and of course, like it helped that there was a Tron video game that was out at the same time, which was fun. Well, one part of it was fun. The light cycle part was fun. It's 4 games. It's like it was basically a collection of mini games. It's 4 mini games, one of them being the light cycle, and that was just the best one. You always wanted that one. But
the video game made more money than the movie did.
Yeah, sadly it did.
So funny.
And it's funny because that's literally what Flynn is complaining about at the beginning of the movies. Like, I'll get whatever money I can pinch out of these machines, and then you see that actually here in the real world that the video game version is actually more successful than the movie version.
So funny.
Definitely a hallmark of a true cult classic. Yeah, definitely. And it had, I'm terrified of the inevitable robot uprising, and this is very much a movie where the primary villain is like AI that got a bit out of hand, and he's all like, I'm gonna fucking take over the White House or whatever, and that's why they sort of have to shut it down, and like, that was scary. I enjoyed that. I was like, yep, okay. Yeah, like they did a good job of making the threat like actually happen in the real world as well, because I think if the threat was only digital, like you as a viewer would be like, at the end of the day, you're like, okay, but why does any of this matter if it's all a digital threat? But at the same time, I mean, 1982, there was barely dial-up internet like getting out there in the world, like, so the idea that the villain was like hacking into the Kremlin and hacking into the White House, like that's years ahead of its time. All of this stuff is just years ahead of its time.
Yeah. Like, did you say it went over your head a lot as a kid? And it is a Disney movie, so I'm assuming it is for children, or were they trying to aim it more at a teenage audience?
I think the latter. I don't think that this is really aimed at kids, although I think they were hoping that the visual aesthetic would be appealing enough. But I think that story is so heady that I think kids just get bored with it at an earlier age, like too early of an age. If you try to show Tron to, I think, a kid too early, it's like, okay, they'll probably be engaged when you get to the grid, when you get to the the light cycles and stuff, but everything else about it, it's a bit slow. Yeah, it's slow, and it's a lot of talking and understanding of like the dialogue that's happening, and there's no sort of immediate, there's no like bam bam bam, Darth Vader doesn't like throw someone across the room for you to go, oh, okay, he's the bad guy. It's just like a computer screen being like end of line, and David Warner being like, uh-oh, this isn't good. And you're like, okay, I'm like 9. Is there a threat? I'm confused. I have to say, I did feel like I was watching this as a child, which I do try and do when I rewatch these movies for my podcast. And as a child, I was like, what? Oh, robot's bad. Go, Jeff Bridges. Yeah, it's like, you try to put yourself back in the mindset of being a child, and you're like, but then you fall into it too much. But you mentioned David Warner. I thought he did a great job as the villain.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you could tell that his first off, he had the Batman problem where you could tell he couldn't move his head, you know, so he kind of had to like move his body. But I think he did a great job working within the parameters of the suit. And speaking of the suit design, I thought he looked really cool. Sark, the bad guy with his horns and everything. Yeah. It's like, oh, there's the devil. He's got the horns, you know.
The bad guy, and like with the red and constantly being under threat. So he played the sort of businessman in the real world. He played the sort of evil guard in the Tron world, and then he also did the voice of like the main computer system that was the like evil AI. Yeah. And he made them all distinct as well. He took it seriously. He looked like he was having fun but respecting the movie at the same time, whereas that easily could have been given to someone that was just like, oh my god, give me my paycheck, like, please.
Right. And he did a lot of, I think he did a lot of subtle acting, a lot of eye acting, especially as Sark, you know, and his death when Tron like blows his brain open and like all those like circuits like fall out, and it's pretty. The circuits are all colorful, but then I took a step back and I'm like, that's his brains though. Like that's pretty brutal, right?
It's like graphic. And Ram is one of the friends that Jeff Bridges makes very early on, and halfway through the movie he dies, and like he doesn't come back. He dies, and it's like an on-screen death, and everyone talks about Mufasa being the first on-screen death of Disney, but here we are in 1982 watching Ram just like fizzle out in front of us, and I was like, he'll be back, and then he never was, and I was like, oh, you can resurrect people from the Jeff Bridges, what? Okay,
yeah.
Ram.
Yeah, and it was kind of like, it was a little sad, too, because, I mean, Ram just has this revelation that you're a user, you know, and it was poorly delivered lines. He was like, the guy who was playing him, he was like, user, my user, like something like that. I was like, oh, man, it was cringy. It was really cringy. And the kid that played Ram, he played Billy the Kid in Back to the Future. Nope.
No,
Bill and Ted. Yep, that's right. I knew it was a time travel movie. But yeah, he died, and you know, Flynn couldn't bring him back to life, which kind of stinks. But then it's funny because like 2 seconds later, Flynn's having the time of his life flying that vehicle, and I'm like, yeah, but your buddy's like corpse just evaporated right next to you.
Literally. So like tonally, it's all over the place as well. It's like, are we sad? Like, are we not sad? Do we care about these people or not because they're computer systems?
Yeah.
To go back to your point on the acting, there was a lot of when Tron comes back from the dead and his girlfriend's there, and like she says something where she's just like, he did it. He threw himself into the stream of light and saved us. And I was like, oh my god, there are so many trained actors out there in the world. How are you in this movie?
I mean, I think even Ram is terrible. And I'm not saying that these actors are terrible because, as we all know, it's the director's job to direct the actors. So, and we've seen Ewan McGregor delivers, you know, stiff lines in the prequel trilogy, and we know that he's a great actor. So it's, you know, it's all the director, right? So when I make fun of an actor, it's the director I'm really making fun of. But you know, like Ram is bad. You know, they're all bad. At some point in time. Although Bruce Boxleitner, I think, does the best, consistently the best. Him and Flynn, I think, are consistently the best. They seem to be having the most fun, but. You know, it's easy, you know, to sort of rail on the acting. I will point out a scene that I always sort of enjoyed when I don't think it was Flynn. Flynn was talking to Ram in the cells, the holding cells, and he was like, "Hey, what did you do before this?" And I liked how Ram, like, he kind of lit up when he started talking about, you know, people's. What was it, like helping people with their retirement, because he just like he just was working for like an actuary firm or something like that, like some kind of menial thing, but like that was his life, and he was passionate about it, whether he was, you know, programmed to be passionate about it or not. That doesn't matter. He was passionate about it, and I really enjoyed that moment that Lisberger allowed the character to have, which was, talk about his old life in a fond way. And I thought the actor did a great job. Like, he was kind of solemn at first, talking about being in the grid and the games, and then he lit up when he started talking about his and it's funny because it's like, oh, but it sounds so boring, but to him it was everything. It was his entire world, and that made that character so much more deeper and endearing than it had any right to be, I think, personally.
Yeah, I think it made him human, didn't it? And Jeff Bridges does an okay job because he knows he is human. And I imagine there was a sort of, however they filmed it was also being implemented onto their acting ability as well, because it must have been kind of strange the way things were done. They had to imagine a lot of stuff was there when it wasn't, perhaps, which can always be a bit stilting. But also these other characters, if you're given your script and you're like, hey, you're like a computer system, you're like Encarta in this movie, you'd be like, oh, okay, I guess I'll just sort of exist then. Like, you don't have any wants or thoughts or fears as much, I guess, so you can't really bring that into your acting, so you do become sort of more two-dimensional. So when he's talking about that, he's given almost a backstory that he can then cling to, and then he sort of comes alive. Whereas, like, I mean, Yuri, when we first meet her, she has to be snapped out of some sort of trance almost, doesn't she? But even then, when she becomes back to normal, she's still quite robotic. I don't know. Does that make sense? Yeah, no,
100%. I've always had a problem with, like, she doesn't recognize Tron at first, and then she kind of, like, looks him in the eyes, and she's like, oh, Tron. And yet they don't explain, totally, like, what these characters are sort of like, because they're sort of, like, been conscripted, into this army. And I guess even though you're not red, you're still part of the overall, quote-unquote, master control team. But that was one of the things that's a little bit confusing. It's like, okay, why is she in a dreamlike state at the beginning? Another thing that I mentioned earlier with Flynn knocking out that one red guy and then sort of absorbing his red energy, and then weirdly attacking Tron later on the air sailor thing or whatever it is, and it's like, okay, I get it. You just needed to get the character of Flynn back to Tron, but why didn't Flynn just stay in the background, even though he's red? Why wasn't he just in the background, like, waving, like, Tron, hey buddy, don't hit me? Why did he attack? I didn't get that. Like, are you part of, like, some kind of hive mob mentality or something? I don't know. But yeah, those are the plot holes that are just big enough to drive a truck through. And modern viewers, it's just like you watch it and you're like, but that makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that that's his strong point. He's definitely, it's weird. I never, until this conversation right now, I never really kind of compared Lisberger to the notorious GL, George Lucas. But they're very similar in the regard that they have this love and appreciation for technology, and they also paint in broad strokes. Lucas isn't that concerned with the nitty gritty of how the technology works in Star Wars, and I'll argue with anyone to the end of time that Star Wars is not a sci-fi movie. It's a fantasy film, just set in like a space setting. But these are just two directors who are not quite concerned with how to get from one scene to another, but they know that they need to get their character to that point, and they also know, like, what they're trying to convey and express, and we're not going to worry about the details. I think George Lucas does it better than Lisberger, but George Lucas had more movies under his belt than Lisberger does.
It's fair. That's a really, really interesting point, actually. Yeah, I agree. I completely agree.
That's why I like talking about movies, because you kind of don't dig into these kind of concepts and whatnot in your head sometimes. Like, you need another person to sort of, springboard it off and everything.
I really enjoyed the ultimate frisbee in this movie. The sort of way they fight, they use literal frisbees, but frisbees of light. And they're sort of just, like, throwing frisbees at each other and exploding, and, like, that was another really fun part. That was really, like, engaging and fun to watch.
I mean, as a child of the 80s who's been watching this their entire life, a frisbee to me will always be a Tron disc, first and foremost, before a frisbee, right? Like, I was introduced to a frisbee as a Tron disc before an actual frisbee.
Wow. It's fun. They're really fun. Like the different lights. Like it's very. That's where I think a younger audience would be able to definitely enjoy it, because I did.
Yeah.
Like the sort of like boing boing ping ping, and like the different colors change, and then they like grab it out of the air. But it's like light that they're grabbing, and then it becomes the disc again, and then they throw it, and then it hits someone, and they explode, and it's just really fun. I was like, "Wee, this is cool!" And then you like never really get to see it again. And I was like, "Bring that back! Bring the ultimate frisbee back!"
And it's a perfect example of like sound design, like really helping things. When there was a shot on Ram's hand when he's doing the frisbee sort of things while he's in the cell, kind of just doing frisbee stuff, and I mean, you can just tell it's a store-bought frisbee, and I mean. It is like that's what they did. It's a straight up store-bought frisbee, but the fact that they add like whenever it hits his hand, it's like that glass sound, that tink 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 glass sound. For some reason, it makes it special at that point. It's like that's the prime example of how sound design can like elevate something. And I was like, oh yeah, no, it's not plastic, it's glass. Like that's it makes sense. But it is 100% a store-bought, frisbee, and like all their armor pieces are all like BMX bike shoulder pads and like hockey helmets. It's all
but together. It's a costume. Like even though you can sit back and be like, oh my god, they went to the dollar store to get this assembly together, but then. It does look so impressive. I mean, when Yuri came on for the first time, I was like, that's cool. I'd cosplay as that. Like, they're just really fun. So that for anyone that hasn't seen it, they're sort of like one-piece suits that have like almost what looks like the insides of a computer, I guess.
Like circuitry, yeah.
Yeah, that's the word. But they're lights. And then they've all got like helmets on. You can't really see their hair. They're all covered up with hats and stuff. They're really fun. Jeff Bridges apparently had too much of a bulge in his suit, so he had to wear a dance belt to like hide it.
I've also heard that I think the Disney studio that they were shooting on the lot. They had to issue basically send them a memo and said, hey, whenever you guys go to the commissary, can you kind of wear bathrobes? Because we can see your junk everywhere. Every single guy and gal, we can see all of your junk and everything. Can you please wear bathrobes when you go and use the commissary? And actually, for the helmet, they were originally supposed to be helmetless, but they couldn't get they couldn't map it, it just was too much for them. And if you go and look online, you can find some behind the scenes shots of Bruce Boxleitner with his hair, and it's like it's crazy hair, like it's all spiked up and everything. It's really interesting, and it's a me thing, but I can't say his name without calling him Bruce Boxcutter for some reason.
It's a funny name. But the outfits aren't like sexy. They're not like overtly sexual or anything. They're just tight, I guess.
Yeah.
But they look really good in the program. They look like they are part of that world. It comes back to the world building as well. Like you can see why they were up for best costume for the Academy Awards. Like it was really cool.
Yeah, and another thing, like, put yourself in their shoes, right? Like Jeff Bridges and all them, they're all sitting around, wearing these outfits. The outfits are all white. The circuitry that later glows is black. Like if you're looking at it just in the real world while they're filming, it's straight up like Attack of the Clones. Like they're literally standing in a room with all these these shaped pads that are supposed to be like, that's a wall, that's this, you have to jump over this. And if you look at it, like I said, it's the prequels. It's everything is going to later be mapped in, and they didn't get final shots until like I think 6 weeks or a few weeks into like already filming. So all these actors just had to trust that this wasn't going to look absolutely stupid on the screen, But I was watching a documentary on a thing on Disney Plus has a really cool documentary on this. It's not a making of. It's kind of him, the director, and his son revisiting it, current time, and they're looking back on it. But that it could have turned out just crazy. It could have turned out terrible. But they trusted him. They trusted him to turn out great. And he says when they got their first shots back, everyone was like, "Oh wow, that's that's what this is going to look like. Like, that's what this
Yeah.
stupid costume is going to look like. Like,
Yeah.
like that's a winner right there. And, you know, it wasn't a winner, spoiler alert, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, you know, we have it now. And that's what, you know, I think sometimes you need a cult classic film to fail when it first comes out in order for it to be a cult classic looking, you know, looked back upon fondly this day and age, you know, 40 years later. I'm sure it didn't
I completely agree.
help anybody back then, right?
No,
I'm sure
no.
people lost their jobs because of it, but,
Yeah.
you know.
But yeah, that's so true. The definition of cult movie almost is like flop.
Yeah, like it has to hit that checkpoint or something, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that everything you said that's wrong with the film is 100% correct. I think everything that you also liked about the film is also 100% correct. And without any nostalgia, I'm always hesitant to show this movie to anybody. I truly think a good entry point to this movie is either having it on in the party in a background and having people like, oh, what is that? Oh, that's neat, you know, but having the volume off, you know, while everyone's just sort of mingling. And then, you know, one or two people might want to say, hey, I'm going to go check that out. Or just give your friends copious amounts of alcohol and weed and and they'll enjoy it and it'll play well. But I'm always afraid that it won't play well for people. I do think Tron Legacy does. I think you'll get now a lot more out of Tron Legacy when you watch it, knowing the original Tron. It's a great movie on its own right. It's a lot of fun, and you can follow the story on its own right. But knowing that you haven't seen it, Emily, and you just watched this, I would highly recommend watching Tron Legacy and really kind of having fun with it. It's a lot more streamlined. It doesn't have the wonky parts to it, but it's just not like it's just not as complicated of a story as I think some people were sort of wanting it to be. But it's on Disney Plus, especially here in the U.S. Have you guys gotten Disney Plus yet? Yeah,
No,
I knew.
not yet.
Yeah. I know that sucks. Like and the whole Mandalorian thing. When you guys do get it, you know it'll be on Disney Plus, streaming in 4K. It looks absolutely gorgeous.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
And they'll have Tron Legacy on there too. Check it out. I think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll have fun. With it.
I think I will. I think if as you say, the story is more streamlined as well and makes a bit more sense, then there's nothing to not like about it. It just suffered from being a bit clunky, as we've said, and so maybe in another 10 years they'll revisit it and do something a bit more complicated or a bit more sort of, I don't know what people want from it. It's such a good world, you could do almost anything.
Well, let me ask you this. Here's one problem that I've always kind of had about the Tron franchise. The movie Tron is actually kind of about Flynn. And then Tron Legacy, it's called Tron Legacy, and Tron, spoiler alert, not really in it at all. And I think one of the and it didn't really do well either. You know, like the Tron franchise is having a hard time, I think, just taking off outside of its pre-existing, you know, niche of people that watch it. And I think the problem is that the name Tron is not your main character. It's not the person that you're trying to latch onto in either of the films. And you'll see what I mean in Tron Legacy. And I think they missed a big problem with Tron Legacy. I think they should have rebranded it as like The Grid or something like that. Took Tron out of the name, although I totally understand why they couldn't, because they had to have that name recognition. But I think it's one of those times where, like, I think Lisberger should have named it something different way back in the day. I mean, like, would naming the movie Flynn be any worse than naming it Tron, right?
Yeah, it's a good point. I have to say, I had no idea what Tron was. I was shocked to find that he was a character in the movie and not... I thought Tron was the world that they go to. That's why I keep referring to it as the Tron place, because I'm like, they go to Tron, right? Like one would go to Narnia.
Right.
But no, Tron is the, like, not virus, like system that had been created by Alan to do something.
to keep, he was basically like a watchdog for Master Control. Like he was created to make sure that Master Control didn't do anything like hack the White House or hack the Kremlin or something. But yeah, it's so weird that
so it's bizarre that not only do they send Jeff Bridges in as a human to save the day, when really Tron's whole purpose is to save the day. That the Tron counterpart wasn't Alan wasn't the main character. Flynn was.
Whose heroic journey was it? Like, whose hero's journey was this? Was it Flynn's hero's journey because he comes back changed afterwards? But then he's not reluctant to enter. So it doesn't adhere to the full, Campbellian hero's journey thing. But at the same time, Tron has a little bit of a hero's journey, and I almost wonder, and this is my first time even thinking about it, would it have been a better movie if Alan had to go in and then he's interacting with his Tron? Tron's like, why do you look like me?
Yeah, that's what I was kind of expecting. When I clocked that they were all multi-rolling, I was like, ooh, fun. Oh, okay, so Tron's one of the... So then we're not doing that. We're doing this instead. Like, what? Yeah, then you have that sort of Prince and the Pauper vibe where, yeah, you're right, they're all like, let's work together. And then that's really fun for the actor to be able to play these two different counterparts of almost the same character. But we didn't have that, which seems like maybe they thought that and they thought it was too obvious. So they were like, let's do something else. But yeah, it's interesting that that's not what happened.
yeah, it's a weirdly structured film, and I do think that, I mean, I don't always say, hey, you have to adhere to the certain three act structures and this and that, but when people don't, you gotta do something really special to not make it weird, We're so used to that Western style of filmmaking now and storytelling that if you're gonna break out of it, you gotta do it well. And this didn't when it comes to like structuring of the film. And we've both said it multiple times that the biggest faults that it has is its pacing and its structure.
Yeah, it's such a good point.
Yeah, but if you haven't seen it, to all your listeners out there, if you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth checking out. Like I said, on Disney Plus, and
definitely for the visuals, 100%. And if you're interested in that early animation CGI sort of stuff, definitely check this out. If you want to see a hot young Jeff Bridges who looks nothing like a 70-year-old Jeff Bridges, which makes sense. But when you watch younger actors and you're like, you can still tell it's them. The only thing I knew that this was Jeff Bridges was because I know his voice from The Last Unicorn. And I was like, that's Jeff Bridges. But like that's not Jeff Bridges. Yeah.
You've never seen Starman or anything?
No, I was checking through his Wikipedia and IMDb, and I don't think I've seen Jeff Bridges in nearly anything at all. Well, I've seen like The Big Lebowski once and like posters for Crazy Heart. And like that's it.
He was really good in the True Grit remake.
I watched True Grit. I
love that. But young Jeff Bridges is a lot of fun to watch. He brings a lot of energy to the table. And you're going to see, when you watch Tron Legacy, Jeff Bridges does he does a lot of multi-person stuff because he also has to play the villain Clue.
Nice.
And there's a shot at the beginning where they do like the Rogue One Tarkin de-aging thing to Jeff Bridges. Yeah, if Tarkin was okay, this came out before that, so there's definitely an upward swing that's been happening in technology, and it kind of started with Tron Legacy. It was one of the biggest like high profile like de-aging. It had already existed before. I think they did it with X-Men Origins, the Wolverine movie was terrible. I think they de-aged Patrick Stewart, but the whole Clue Jeff Bridges thing, it's like taken to the next level. He gets more screen time than Tarkin does even. But weirdly it works because it's already in a digital world, so the fakeness weirdly fits.
They get away with it.
Yeah, but in Legacy there is a shot at the beginning of the film that takes place in the real world before Flynn kind of disappears or whatever with the story. And you do see him in the real world as the CGI de-aged Jeff Bridges, and that looks absolutely terrible. And you're like, oh God. You're like, the uncanny valley just smacked me in the face, basically.
Yeah.
So, but it's cool. The overall, the light cycle set pieces on Legacy is just outstanding. Like the action set pieces in Legacy takes everything that you liked in this, like Ultimate Frisbee, times 1,000. Like, it just looks amazing. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah. Just quickly, a young Jeff Bridges did remind me of a young Kurt Russell. Like, the two were clearly the sort of men
Yes.
of the 80s.
Yes. Like the guys, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, there's a few good shots of Jeff Bridges and Bruce Boxleitner's toned buns and their spandex in this movie. So I was like, hey, good job, guys. Look at doing those squats. Good job.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for giving me an excuse for watching it. I am really glad I've seen it, and I genuinely just wouldn't have watched it if you hadn't told me to. So, thank you.
I am happy to have given you that excuse, and I totally get it. There's a lot of movies that my co-host and I watch on Podcasting After Dark where he had seen it, but not me. So,
yeah.
And I'm like, I never would have watched this movie if you didn't make us watch it, and I'm glad you did. You know,
yeah. So much of that. Do you want to talk more about Podcasting After Dark and your many other things that you do?
Yeah. So I have a few podcasts, but I really just want to plug Podcasting After Dark. Me and my buddy Zach. It's every other week. We kind of break down and review these cult classic films from the 80s and the 90s, but unlike Tron, it's more like Life Force and like action movies and you know, healthy dose of nudity, healthy dose of violence, you know, horror movies, stuff like that. We did like Fright Night, we've done Hardware, we've done all kinds of movies. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, we go through the movie, we actually break it down scene by scene, and and the conceit is that one episode, Zach will pick a movie, and it doesn't have to be that I've never seen it, but like I might not have seen it for a while, but he picks it. He's like, I love this movie as a kid, let's watch this. And then he gets to revisit it, and then I get to visit sometimes for the first time, and then the next episode we'll do the reverse, and I'll pick it. And whoever picks it is the one that has to sort of track the film. And, you know, some movies like Cyborg, I picked the Jean-Claude Van Damme Cyborg movie. I had like 5 pages of notes. And then I stupidly picked The Thing, you know, John Carpenter's The Thing to do. And there's so much in that movie that I had 10 pages of notes and carpal tunnel by the end of it. So, but our episodes can go for like 3 hours long. Our longest one was The Thing. We talked for about 3 hours and 15 minutes. But they're long and beefy, so if you like the movie, enjoy it. Break it up into multiple sittings if you have to, but they're fun. And then on the Podcasting After Dark Patreon, we kind of have some spin-off shows. We have this one show called Interviews After Dark, and we actually interview celebrities from these movies that we talk about. So we just interviewed Zach Ward, who played Scut Farkus in A Christmas Story, and he was also like in the second Resident Evil movie and whatnot. We interviewed Diane Franklin. She was in Terror Vision. She was in Last American Virgin. She was in Better Off Dead. We interviewed Tom Matthews. He was in Return of the Living Dead. And we interviewed Stephen Jeffries, who was Evil Ed in Fright Night. So we kind of... Oh, and then we just also interviewed Tony Timpone, who was the longtime former editor of Fangoria magazine from like the 80s and the 90s. So he had he's like a walking encyclopedia of knowledge. So
that's so cool.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the spin. That's kind of like where we're at with Podcasting After Dark. We're on all the major podcatchers. So if you just go to podcastingafterdark.com, you can get to, you know, all the other podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that kind of stuff. You can get there from there. So, yeah.
They are really, really fun. I listened to your Fright Nights episode, and it's really cool, whether you've seen the movie or not, because I've never seen the Fright Nights movies, but I know a lot about them. So it was really fun to sort of follow through, and you sort of expand on things, and you guys are really funny. So definitely check it out.
Thank you.
Definitely.
One thing we never want to do is like outright make fun of something for being bad. Or, well, all right, I take it back. We make fun of it, but we will also put as much energy into what we like about it. And I'll watch movies with Zach that I'm not like in love with it as a whole, but I'm able to like latch on to parts here and there. And so, like, you know, and I as you know, like the Fright Night, I actually didn't care for it, but I enjoy talking about it, and I'll be happy to talk about what I do like about a film, you know, even if I don't like the film as a whole. So yeah, it's, and I know, because I know a lot of people think, oh, okay, is this just like, how did this get made? Do you just talk about how crappy this movie is? And I'm like, actually, it's the exact opposite. We go into every movie assuming we're gonna love it, and then, you know, we're kind of let down here and there, but, you know, we'll, even if we're let down by it, like Cyborg, you know, we both were with Cyborg, we'll actually, you know, we'll still try to latch on to the stuff that we liked about it, or like we remembered we liked about it. So we don't just shit on the movie the entire time, basically.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it. Absolutely.
It's been such a joy. Definitely check out Tron if you've got Disney Plus, and if you haven't, hopefully we'll get it over here soon. And I'm going to check out Tron Legacy. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time on Why This Film. Bye!
Bye, guys and gals.
We watched the film and we talked about it, but now it's time to say goodbye. We'll be back again with another movie that makes you wanna ask why.